In this video, we're going to continue on from part 1, where we showed you how to create your own custom block that can be used in your apps and websites. And now we're going to add some extra functionality and not just have a block that we can choose files, but we're actually going to add an extra field to it, which is going to dynamically feed files in so that you don't actually need to update your website or app. You can just upload files to the system and they'll automatically show up here if they match certain criteria. So we're going to do that by using a query, and we're going to add a field to our block that allows us to select that query. So I'm going to click the block, and then I'm going to click this code button here, which is going to bring up the code just like we had from part 1. And I'm going to click component fields. I'm going to add a new field. It's going to be a basic field, and I'm going to type in query. Take note that the key here is query because it's just going to try and automatically generate that by our title. With the data type, I'm going to choose content reference, and the reference type is going to be, you guessed it, a query. We're going to ask the person to select a query. Now the minimum answers is 0. That's fine. It means you don't have to pick a query, and the maximum answers is 1, which means that the user is going to choose one single query. We're not going to do multiple queries or anything in here. So if we click the code tab here, we can go back to our code, and we can add our pre-tag just like we did in step 1 and spit out data.query. And if we hit save, what that means is as we select the block, if we choose a query, so I actually have a couple of queries here. I'm going to choose this files query, which just returns all the files in the system. You'll see that now our query details have been printed out onto the screen in that pre-tag. Now that's all well and good. The problem is we don't actually want to spit out the query. We want to, if I click this query, I can see the results of the query, returns these 3 files. We actually want to return the results on the screen here. So to do that, I'm going to click edit again, and we need to get the results in here, not just the query. So let's get started. I'm going to get rid of that pre for the moment. And up here in our computed functions, we're using Vue.js, so there's plenty of documentation about computed functions on Vue, but this is obviously a fairly advanced tutorials. So we're going to expect that you can be able to follow along with this. In our computed function, we're just going to write query ID. I'm just going to make this a really simple variable that will tell us just the ID of the query, not all of the extra junk. So to do this, I'm going to return this $fluoro. I'm going to use the Fluoro API, which is available. It's documented very well as well, so we will link that in the bottom of the video. But I'm going to use the utils get string ID function. What this allows you to do is pass through an object with all the information, and it'll give you back just the ID of what you're processing. So in here, we're going to go fluoro.utils.getStringID, and I'm going to pass through this .data.query. So yeah, that will return us our query ID. And now I'm going to use the async computed object here. And what this means is it's like computed properties, except they're going to be asynchronously computed, which means that they may take some time. It may have to load some information from the server or do some things. It's not immediate. And we're going to add our own property called results. Again, that's going to be an object. I'm going to add a default value for that, which is just going to be an empty array. And I'm going to add a get function. And in here, we want to return a promise. So we can do that by returning a new promise with a resolve and a reject. We need to put a function in there with a resolve and a reject. What about I typed something in wrong there? Sorry. So there we go. We've got our new promise, and whatever we resolve, that's what results will end up being. And I'm going to go to the Fluoro Vue documentation here, and I'm just going to search for the word query. And there's an example here of how you can run a query just using the Fluoro API. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to paste that in, and I'm just going to click off the JavaScript window and back so that it auto formats and indents nicely. Now the only problem here is the word this, which refers to the scope that you're on. Up here, I'm going to add the word self equals this so I can refer to our component. Otherwise, when it's inside a promise closure, this will mean something totally different. So what we want is self.fluoro.content.query, and this, instead of this hard-coded kind of query ID, we want to return self.query ID. So that will use this property. And then we're going to get a promise with then with the results, and we can just resolve the response, and we can do a catch, and we can just use the reject function up here. Now the interesting thing is this this whole function is itself a promise, so this is kind of superfluous. So we might just get rid of that and get rid of that, and we could also just get rid of that and return this. So that's as simple as it needs to be. It's going to return the results of the query. And now over here, if we do pre, we can actually get those results just by typing out results, and we hit save, and you'll see here it's loaded the results and spat them on the screen. Now if we edit, we can grab our A tags like this, just like we did with the files, and we can just go over here where it says v4 item in data.files. We can just change that to results, and now we've got all of those. We've got the file that we picked, this first draft. I can remove that as well. And then we've got the results of the query. And now we're free to kind of tidy it up, maybe add some border radius on the styles. We can fade off that a little bit, maybe add a bit more padding, and we can just do SVG float right, and hit save. How's that looking? That looks a little bit nicer. And then we can save and publish, and we can view the results on our page. So there we go. Now you'll see that there's two results here, whereas when we're in the web builder, we can see other results. That's due to the permissions of the application. So when you're running this, when you're in the builder, the information that you see here will be dependent on the permissions that you have. So I'm logged in at the moment building a website. I'll be able to see these files, whereas the website itself over here may not actually have permission to load those files from the back end. So you can always be ensured that only people with correct access will be able to access files from the back end. That includes websites, apps, users as well. So yeah, that's part 2.